Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. One of the most overlooked entries in the super canon is the 1988 to 1992 television series Superboy. Across 100 episodes of low-budget syndicated glory, the series transformed in front of and behind the camera. Starring John Hames Newton in Season 1 and Gerard Christopher in Seasons 2 through 4, Superboy followed Clark Kent and Lana Lang from the halls of Schuster University to the desks of the Bureau for Extranormal Matters in Capital City, Florida. Now, it's time to examine the series, its evolution, highlights, and standout character adaptations. These are the Superboy TV Mixtapes. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superboy fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. These are the Superboy TV Mixtapes, and joining me to discuss the evolution of Lex Luthor across the series is the host of From Crisis to Crisis, The Married Years, a Superman and Lois podcast, Michael Bailey. Welcome back.
Man, I am so glad to be here. I have been enjoying this Superboy series so much. I've been like every Tuesday, or if I don't get to it on Tuesday, it's on Wednesday. I'm listening to it because you have tackled this subject in such a comprehensive way, while still only like touching a fragment of the history of the character at the same time.
Very true. No, but I really appreciate that. In general, and especially coming from you, that really means a lot. And I'm honored to have you here. Right off the bat, fair to say that Sherman Howard is the most overlooked / underrated Lex Luthor performer out there?
Absolutely. He is the one no one talks about because this is a show that people still are largely unfamiliar with compared to other Superman related media. And this is no hyperbole. I'm not just saying it because I'm on this episode. He's in my top 3 of live action Lexus. It's John Shea, Sherman Howard, and Michael Rosenbaum. And, not that there's much to choose from beyond that, but still, it's like no one has Lyle Talbot in their top 3 or top 5. So,
look, you never know. There might be this whole contingent of Lyle Talbot fans out there banging the drum for those Superman serials. But on that note, I just was curious as I was getting ready for this recording, and so I just did a search for articles ranking the Lex Luthor actors. And I found one on Screen Rant that didn't have Sherman Howard on it at all. Another one on Newsarama. Similarly, he was totally MIA. And then I found a CBR article that had him ranked second to last in front of only Scott Wells, who played Lex on the first season of the Superboy show. And what really got me was when they were describing the Superboy series, they described it as, quote, mostly terrible. And I'll tell you this. A couple of months ago, I probably wouldn't have batted an eye at that. But now I'm like, oh, hell no. Like, this show is better than that, and give it the respect that's due. So, yeah, it kind of annoyed me as I was doing my little bit of research.
That's the thing, is that this show, because it was a syndicated show in the late 80s and early 90s, during kind of like the heyday of syndicated television, really it was Star Trek: The Next Generation, I think, that got that type of show, like more like people were more likely to tune into like the local channels that were carrying it. But because it was in that era, and because it was all over the place, and like not where I lived, it was Saturday nights at like 6 or 7 o'clock. And for the first 3 seasons, it was Superboy, followed immediately by My Secret Identity. But some places didn't get it at all. And some places don't even know what my secret identity is. So, and because it's not on streaming services right now, as far as watching it as part of your service, you can buy it digitally. But you can't like, it was on Tubi for like 5 minutes. And the DVDs are Warner Archives, so it's not like something you're going to find in a store. Not that people are selling DVDs and Blu-rays in stores anymore. I think it has that cachet of being terrible because it was done cheaper than network. But man, once you get into that second season, and especially seasons 3 and 4, that show started cooking in a way that I don't think anybody expected. And I'm telling this to your listeners right now who have never bothered to watch it. Just buy the DVDs from Warner Archive if you still have a DVD player, because it's rough at the beginning, but once they figure everything out, it becomes one of the best Superman shows you've never seen.
Well said. And you're preaching to the choir. And I do hope that after these episodes, or during the course of these episodes, that we inspire people to check out, if not the entire series, at least some of these key episodes that we're highlighting here, because the best of the series is especially strong. And I do hope people will seek it out and take a look at it. Now, you mentioned it airing on Saturday nights for you back in the day. So was this part of your regular viewing routine? What was your relationship with the show as it was airing?
Well, it started in 88, and 88 was one of those, what I call, for me personally, big Superman years. Like 88, 93, 2006, 2013. These are the years where, for whatever reason, there was just Superman stuff to consume. And 88 was the 50th anniversary. So at the beginning of the year, you had all of that. And at the end of the year, when I was entering junior high, because my school district was weird. They put grades 7 through 9 in junior high, and then 10 through 12 was high school. I don't know why they did that, but that's just how East Bend School District rocked. But I'd enter junior high. Saturday mornings, I'd be up at 7 o'clock to watch the Ruby Spears. And then that in the evenings, I'd be in front of the TV because I did not have much of a social life in junior high. And for the next 3 years, it was appointment television. And even when I got into high school for that final season, I still did my best to keep watching it. It was really a big deal for me that there was it was Superboy, but it was essentially Superman.
Yes. Yeah. That's something that becomes very clear as you're watching this. I think they very much wanted to be making a Superman show. And so wherever they could, that's effectively what they did, despite its title.
But yeah, it was, and it's one of those things where I was one of those guys, like in the early 2000s, where people would be like, there was a Superboy show. And I'm like, oh yes, there was. And wanting it to come out on DVD. And then the crushing disappointment of realizing they're going to start with season 1, which has some bangers, but is not as good as the seasons that came after it.
Very true. Now, kind of on that note, Lex Luthor, as played by Scott Wells, appears in 4 season 1 episodes. And then they recast with Sherman Howard at the beginning of season 2, though that recasting, unlike the recasting of Clark Kent, was accounted for in story as Lex undergoes plastic surgery. And Sherman Howard would go on to appear in 17 episodes from seasons 2 through 4. So all told, out of the 100 episodes, Lex is far and away the most frequent villain antagonist who appears throughout the series. Mostly we're here to talk about Sherman Howard, but if you'll indulge me just a couple of minutes on Scott Wells here, because I don't think we'd be breaking any new ground to say that it was not a good performance. Speaking for myself, the Scott Wells incarnation of Lex, he was this preppy iteration of the character, very whiny, very over the top, very stiff. It didn't feel like there was a lot of nuance or authenticity in the performance, though in fairness, the material wasn't doing him any favors either. But like I said, not really breaking new ground to say that. I guess my question is, in terms of the performance and or just the writing, the overall depiction of season 1 Lex, the answer might just be no to this, but is there anything valuable, worthwhile, noteworthy that we should say about that season 1 iteration of the character?
There was a point where I would badmouth Scott Wells, and it's funny when you watch the special features on the season 1 DVD. John James Newton has nothing but nice things to say about the guy. But now my opinion is he wasn't the master thespian, but he also wasn't dealing with Shakespeare. So it's not like he was being given much to work with. When you look at his first appearance in that first episode, and he turns to Leo and goes, "Nobody talks to the senior class president like that. Nobody." It's just like, I am hitting my mark, and I'm hitting my mark as hard as I can. But it was a new show. Relatively inexperienced actors, inexperienced producers. There was a writer's strike that first season, so they were dealing with that. So I now grade Scott Wells on a curve. And what I think is that they were trying to do, this is going to sound weird, I approach it the same way I approach Jesse Eisenberg in BVS. They are going for a completely new take on this classic character. John James Newton wasn't doing Christopher Reeve, and Scott Wells wasn't doing Gene Hackman. He was a preppy. He was like, basically, if adult Lex is rich, evil businessman, this Lex is evil, rich frat boy almost. And his plots were nonsensical. I know Rob O'Connor loves the basketball episode, and I think that's one of the better Lex Luthor stories of the 4. But it's still, it's a basketball. It's like most of the first season of this show is basically they took plots from like the A-Team and just did episodes, but just put Superman in instead of B.A. Baracus. But overall, I would not put him like high on a list, but I also don't discount it because they were learning as they went. And so I can't, and he's no longer with us too. So I feel kind of bad talking about speaking ill of the dead. But I think by the end, and especially the episode we're going to be talking about, I think he kind of embraced what that character was. And I think the writers by that point had figured it out as well.
Well said. No, I appreciate all of that. And, going back to what I was saying, and you hit on this as well about the material itself that he had. His final appearance, one of the episodes that we did take a look at, the season 1 finale, Luthor Unleashed, where Luthor goes bald and blames Superboy. There's a scene, an exchange between him and Lana where he hits Lana. I want to circle back to that. But at the end of that scene, he gives her a lock of his hair that had fallen out to give to Superboy, and then immediately takes it back. And he's like, "Never mind, it's all I have left." And I was saying to myself, that's tough to make work. It's so, it's so awkward and silly. So in his defense, he only had so much to work with. And just in terms of the way the show initially conceived of Lex, I do very much like, for a show that shied away from a lot of the Superboy trappings from the lore, they did initially make these two characters contemporaries, which you then lose when you get into the subsequent seasons, even though internally Lex is still the same age, but now he's in the body of this older man. And very quickly into the Sherman Howard era, there's never any reference of their time together as classmates or anything like that. They were really off doing their own thing. So even though it's different from the comics, the fact that they start off with them as contemporaries, I do like that. And of course, it makes me think of the Smallville iteration, which of course gave us a far, far more complicated, deep relationship between the two. But still, I kind of like that. And the fact that he's operating as this student at Schuster University, and Clark and the gang do seem to have his number from pretty early on, that he's not a good guy, but he's not an outlaw in the first season. And so this post-crisis child, right, loves the idea of this Lex who has this facade that allows him to operate unimpeded largely in the world. So that aspect of it was interesting to me as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that this came out at the same time that, or at least this iteration of Lex that we're talking about came out the same year that the Ruby Spears series hit. And that Lex was very much the post-crisis meets Gene Hackman type of thing. I would have killed, nothing against Leo, who basically looks like the guy that should be the stunt guy for Superboy,
right?
To a certain extent. And for anybody who is wondering what a mullet actually looks like, watch the Leo episodes because he is definitely rocking a late 80s mullet. All I'm saying is that, there's like a lover boy poster in his room, and he's just rocking out to whatever contemporary music is big at the time. The thing I liked about the schemes that he was running is that it was all, watching it now as an adult. I didn't think this as at 12. At 12, I ate everything up with a spoon because I was just excited to see Superman Superman character on my screen. But as an adult, looking at it with a little more critical eye, and always judging it, is this something I would force my wife to sit down and watch with me? Season 1, no. But some of the season 2, 3, and 4 episodes, maybe. Is everything was scaled down. So Clark's a reporter, but he's a reporter for a college newspaper. There's no Jimmy, but you got TJ, who, by the way, I loved TJ White. I thought he had a great dynamic, and I don't think they ever replaced him. There was a hole in the show after he left. So Lex was scaled down. So instead of, being a gun runner or a gang lord or whatever else he was in the comics, he is doing college betting and, betting on college football games and, just whatever nefarious things he's running up against, because I have a whole canon thing we're going to get into later about how I can justify know thine enemy and this version of Lex. Because in my opinion, now looking at it, this is all an act that he's putting on. He's one of those guys that came from a completely different background, but he's presenting himself as the rich kid, as the guy that comes from money. He's basically the villains in like every, Revenge of the Nerd film. So I can't believe when I was watching it, I was like, I am putting way too much thought into this. But at the same time, I'm like, one, that's kind of the point of a podcast. And two, there's actually meat on the bone to kind of to dig through on this, to mix my metaphors there.
I similarly put a lot of thought into this as well. And I actually went back over the course of doing these episodes. I rewatched all 4 of those Scott Wells episodes from season 1. And so the first episode aired was the Jewel of Technical, and he and Leo steal this mystical artifact that Professor Lang brings to the campus. There's The Fixer. That's the basketball betting episode, which I'll circle back to. There's Kryptonite Kills, the first appearance of Kryptonite, though it's not named as such in that episode. And Lex steals a piece of it and uses it as this power source. And then, of course, the season 1 finale, Luthor Unleashed, where he goes bald and all of that. But the Fixer episode, we've kind of been using this, and I feel like it's often cited when the show even is discussed in articles and whatnot, as an example of the very kind of ho-hum, low-stakes episodes in season 1. But I gotta be honest, there is a charm to it. And for me, I don't have such a problem with low stakes if they're personal. And that episode really isn't personal to our core trio, but their friend, the star basketball player Stretch, is being blackmailed by Lex to throw the game. Do you remember the bit of evidence that he has against him? Photos of him smoking dope, and threatens to release this. But,
1988. Yeah,
but he's just saying no. Just say no. But he's their friend, and so they are invested. And then I feel like that calls upon us to invest to a degree. And there's also something kind of charming about the fact that it's their school's team, that there's that kind of connection point as well. I'm not saying this is the most gripping episode in the series, but rewatching it, I'm like, you know what? There's something entertaining or interesting about this. And then the final gag of Superboy serving as the referee and flying back and forth across the court, which I actually give them credit for, because it would have been really easy to just have him stand there or run back and forth, but they put in the effort to actually have him flying. So something to it.
And one of the best changes of the first season too, he actually goes into a phone booth. Not as impressive as doing the shirt rip while on a skateboard with a public shopping center behind you. But close, I think,
Yeah. Oh my God. I know it's funny. All these episodes that hasn't come up yet, the skateboard shirt rip, but so thank you for reminding me of that.
It's the one that when it happened, I'm like, man, that's kind of cheesy, but I love a good shirt rip, and still on a skateboard. Still better than anything we got in Superman Returns. So I'm just, and that was a major motion picture. So
there you go. No, but I like your point about the headcanon, because actually one of the reasons why I rewatched those episodes was after getting through Know Thine Enemy, I said, well, how much of Lex's backstory did they even say, even in just throwaway lines in those season 1 episodes? And unless I'm mistaken, the only thing we get is in The Fixer when Clark confronts Lex. And this is not the meek milquetoast Clark of season 2. This is the season 1 Clark who will get in your face. And he says to Lex, why are you such a jerk? And Lex is like, hard work, strong genes, and a very, very rich father. Which doesn't line up with then what we will see in the Luthor origin 2-parter, Know Thine Enemy. But, and I know we'll get to it, but I like what you bring up, because maybe there is a way to kind of marry those two, and the idea that this was all an act. And maybe that then helps account for what we perceive to be the failings of the performance, but the character himself is putting on an act. I like it, man. I go with that.
Yeah. Now, and really it comes from, I am a huge fan of Law and Order. And every once in a while, they'll do an episode where they'll be investigating somebody, and like everybody thinks that this is somebody that comes from money. And then you find out that they didn't, that they come from a very poor background and it was all an act. And I'm like, well, if they can do it on Law and Order, it can make sense here too. And that's more of Lex reinventing himself after doing what he did. And when you think about it, with Know Thine Enemy, he has one thing that he loves. So what would be a better way to set that person up for the rest of their lives than to become very rich, and then they don't ever have to worry about anything ever again?
Yes. And look, obviously you and I are reading into this what was not intended from those original episodes. But I think another piece of evidence in favor of your theory is in that Fixer episode, when we see Lex's screen for how much he had bet, it was like 10 grand, which, look, it's nothing to sneeze at, and especially in $1988, but still, if you really have a very, very rich father, that probably wouldn't be money worth killing over. I mean, he threatens to kill Stretch if he doesn't go along with this. So to your point, maybe there's something to that. That's why the stakes were so high for him. It's a way to look at those season 1 episodes and maybe get a little bit more value and meaning from them than was initially there. So I like it.
Now, I'm glad that I was able to bring that to the show.
So let's zero in initially here on the end of season 1, that Luthor Unleashed episode, and then the first 2 episodes of season 2 with this ring, Ivy kill, and Lex Luthor sentenced to death, because that gives us this transition from Scott Wells to Sherman Howard. It's also fascinating to me that this also coincides with the transition from John Haymes Newton to Gerard Christopher. And part of me says, well, if we're already doing one recasting, like, let's rip off the Band-Aid. But then the other part of me is like, maybe they could have waited until a little bit later into the season. It's a lot of change right up front in season 2.
And 13-year-old me I knew that they were changing Superboy because I was reading, there was a magazine at the time that was done by the same publisher as Starlog called Comic Scene. And they did an article on the first Superboy series. And then they did a feature article on the changes to everything. So I knew that we were getting a new one, and I knew I was a little disappointed because I liked John Haymes Newton. But yeah, when you're watching that and Lex Luthor goes through plastic surgery, which I'm sure everything in live action Superman eventually rhymes with itself. So, Morgan Edge doing the same thing in Smallville to go from Rutger Hauer to Patrick Bergen. I mean, it happened once. It's going to happen again. But there was not only a change in actors, which is big enough, but the tone of both Superboy and Lex shift significantly. And we went from a Clark that was very, I don't want to say necessarily George Reeves, because as much as I like John Haymes Newton, he didn't have that natural charisma I think that George Reeves had as the character. I'm preaching to the choir here, I know, on that one. But I liked his post-crisis approach to the character, and I felt at 13, when you know everything, that they had taken like a step back. It's like, I like Superman the movie, but I don't want to see that Clark again. So yeah, it was a lot for 13-year-old me to deal with.
What do you make of the decision to not address the recasting of Clark and Superboy, but to address the recasting of Lex? Because they could have just done the same thing with Lex that they did with Clark. It's just a new actor now, but they made that a story point.
I have two theories on that. One, Sherman Howard is much older than Scott Wells. However, looking at Scott Wells in that military uniform, they have like the same bone structure. Like there is a lot of similarity physically between the two of them. So when they cast Sherman Howard, I think there was some thought that, okay, this guy could conceivably have plastic surgery. But I also think they were wanting to go in a completely new direction with Lex. And to do that, you are completely, by having him change his appearance and assume for a very brief time, the identity of this businessman, that they were like, we are doing a huge line in the sand. This is a new era. It's almost a new character. And this separates him from the old one. Whereas Clark didn't need that, because he was still going to Schuster. He was still working for the paper. Yeah, he got an obnoxious roommate in the form of Elin Mitchell Smith, who was in Weird Science, which, by the way, was, done by John Hughes. What else was done by John Hughes? Pretty in Pink. Who was this character dressed as when he walked in? He had watched Pretty in Pink and was rocking the ducky look. Played by John Cryer. It's all connected. Suddenly I'm that character from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and I've got like a huge board behind me. No, I just think that Clark didn't need it. It was enough that it was enough that he was nerdier and apparently shopping at like Goodwill for his clothes. Because some of those shirts, man, those were some plaid shirts in that season.
Now, there's one word I want to drill down on. You mentioned Lex briefly assuming the identity of Warren Eckworth. And I have to point this out. One of the most bonkers things about all of this is in that first episode of season 2, there's all this business about how for months Lex has been undergoing these procedures and recuperation. He cut into his face. He put acid on his vocal cords to lower his register. He burned off his fingerprints. He kills poor Leo because Leo is the only one who knows. He even gets to the point he kills the real Warren Eckworth, takes his place as the CEO of this gigantic corporation, setting himself up for success, seemingly. And what's the first thing he does? He reveals himself to Lana Lang. What's all of this for?
I think it's just the arrogance of the character. He thinks he's the smartest guy in the room. So he thinks that, he's going to kill Superboy. He gets Lana. He's got this new life. And he's even got this side piece in the form of Darla. So like he's everything's cream cheese at that point to him. The line, I am you and you are dead. Like this show got away with so much because it was a syndicated show. The fact that he had Leo's dead body propped up at the supposed wedding, I was just like, oh, I forgot about that. That's creepy.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. Now, of course, before we get to that and before the actual arrival of Sherman Howard, we do have that season 1 finale, Luthor Unleashed, which finally gets us to the point where, with Lex specifically, we're kind of falling in line with the Silver Age origin story, where to an extent. But initially in this episode, you have Lex and Leo stealing this military weapon, and then you have Lex mixing chemicals in his tricked out dorm room, engaging in some chemical warfare here. And of course, a fire starts. Superboy comes in, uses his breath, just like he does in the Silver Age comic book story, and saves Lex. And Lex is initially grateful. And Superboy takes him outside, and Lana kind of takes over and caring for him. And they really, I think, try to cram a lot of character development, if you want to call it that, into like a couple of lines where Lex has seemingly had this change of heart. He's like, Superboy, he saved me. And to Lana, he said, you're being so nice to me. And that seemingly sets him on this new path, and he starts pursuing Lana romantically, which as someone who watched Smallville religiously, it was quite the shock when I finally watched this show and I was like, they did it first.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It was actually, on a conceptual level, this episode is probably the strongest of the season. Dipping into that Silver Age origin like they did was a surprise to me at that age, because I was familiar with that, not from the comics actually, but from the Super Friends, because they did an episode where they showed Superboy and Lex. But it's really interesting. Like, this really needed to be a two-parter,
Yes.
in my opinion, because I think they had way too much story for 22 minutes. It just, I would have liked an entire episode of Lex being a nice guy before he makes the ultimate turn when his hair falls out.
I couldn't agree more. And that's the thing with this, because I know some might just totally write off this series or even this season, but there's value here, as we've said, and even especially in this first season, and they come so close. And I think, yes, had this been a two-parter, that would have gone a long way. And I know it's easy decades later to Monday morning quarterback, and I get that, but it would have been great if, when they first used Lex for the first of his 4 appearances in that first season, if they had the foresight to kind of seed this throughout the season, maybe, and yes, the Smallville fan in me, but even, you know what, I'll even put that aside. Even if you just go back to that Silver Age Adventure Comics issue, Superboy and Lex are pals for those first few pages. If you had gone with that for his first couple of appearances, and then you have this turn, I think that would have gone a long way. But at a minimum, yes, 2 parts to, I think, really flesh this out, especially Lana's side of it. Because Lana goes so far as she goes out on a date with him. You don't see the date. And the only interaction you have before he turns on her is when she's helping him after the fire. Then you have Leo showing up with this gigantic flower delivery and the string quartet, or not the string quartet, but the barbershop quartet singing to her. But there's so little that you see between Lana and nice Lex. And that's what you needed to see in this, I feel.
Yeah, to have the fall make more sense. It's like, would Smallville's Lex been as good if you didn't spend so many seasons rooting for him to make the right decision? And then when he finally turns, it's like, it's crushing. Because, and I thought I wasn't going to like that. I'm going to be honest with you. I thought, man, I kind of dig this, but man, I want him to be the bad guy. But then, like, I'm getting to season 3 and I'm like, Clark, why are you being such a jerk to this guy? He's done nothing but try to be nice to you. And then when you realize that's when they got you, I would have liked to have seen that here, because when he hits her, one, it's upsetting, because that kind of violence is just upsetting in general. But 2, it was a really economical way in the short period of time that they had for the episode to show that he had turned. I am disappointed that TJ was quasi defending him. I was disappointed in TJ in this episode for a number of things. Apparently he woke up at the beginning of the episode and had been watching Miami Vice reruns all night, because that was his outfit. And his hair was a little more coiffed. But when they're talking, like, TJ, when a girl you're friends with says that her boyfriend hit her, the first thing you say is, we need to call the cops.
Yeah, and we need to get him. Like where is he? Like, we're going to find... No, I know. TJ left something to be desired, as much as I am a defender of him. And I do agree that when we go beyond Lana and we're talking about the supporting cast on the series, it never gets better than TJ on this show. So. No, I agree. And something that I know you have pointed out, and we talked about this when we did our Silver Age Superboy episode, but that Silver Age Adventure Comics issue where Lex turns on Superboy, yes, the balding that he blames on Superboy is part of it, but it's not the sole reason for the animosity. He feels that Superboy is jealous of him and his scientific achievements and is looking to get in his way. Here, it really boils down to Superboy blew out those chemicals on me to make me bald on purpose. That's really it. And we're not harping on the acting. However, that scene where he wakes up and he realizes his hair has fallen out and he screams and falls to the ground. I mean, that's a moment. Where's the gif of that? I haven't found that, but we need that.
I saw that and I'm like, wow, way to make the episode 3 Darth Vader no at the end look Oscar worthy in comparison.
It's a moment. It's a moment. But once again, in fairness of the late Scott Wells, there are other people on set. There's a director. I mean, I think that's a moment where you're like, hey, maybe maybe take it down.
Maybe dial it down a bit, or you know, like I honestly think I have a theory that if Batman, the 1989 Batman film, which was coming out like a month after this episode originally aired, if that had come out before this series, I guarantee you they would have spoofed the mirror, and you know, when the Joker is getting his bandages taken off. But no, they didn't do that there. Because you know, time works the way it works. No, it's like the beginning of this episode is great. The ending, I mean, did he go down to Disney and like get the stunt actors from the Indiana Jones attraction to come up and serve as his minions and ninjas? Because of course, because it's 1988, there was going to be ninjas.
I know, it's amazing. So right, Lex has this weapon that he stole at the beginning of the episode, and he's auctioning it off to these 3 criminal enterprises, and he has Leo tell them to each send their best assassin because he, in addition to selling his weapon, wants to kill Superboy. And the quote unquote battle, I think, leaves a bit to be desired. I think it's in keeping with what we've seen in terms of kind of the lackluster execution in a lot of these season 1 episodes. I mean, Superboy is getting blasted with this hypersonic device, but still he struggles more than you would expect him to with humans in this battle. But
yeah, it's not that, like, because again, I'm grading all of this on a curve. Even that was the only time in the episode where I was just like, yeah, I can't shine this up and make it look better than it actually was. And, you know, again, it's nothing against anybody involved. I cut this entire series metric yards of slack. Because again, if people, and I'm sure you've talked about this in other chapters of this, you know, Ilya Salkind and all of them just jumped into this. They had to build everything. In fact, this season they were working out of the Disney studios, and it's only the next season that they start working at a Universal. But they had to build all the infrastructure. They had, you know, luckily they had like the flying guys from the movies, which is why I was reading recently somebody saying that the flying effects in the show look terrible, and I'm like, no, they didn't. They actually look really good in 90% of the time. They're amazing. You know, there are other times where it's just like, okay, that was a little weak, but you know, on a TV budget, at no point does either John Hames Newton or Gerard Christopher flap their cape in front of the camera with a whooshing sound behind it.
We still love you, Lois and Clark, but yeah, no, I agree.
Oh, I say I love all Superman. I just love some Superman more than others, but
yeah, no, I hear you. Going back to the hitting Lana scene, that's another moment that would later play out on Smallville in a much even darker, more dramatic fashion. And I rewatched that scene, and we have loads more Smallville talk to come. But of course, it made me think of that moment on the Smallville television series, and all these years later, it so stood out to me because this really is a tangent, but bear with me. But the fact that you have this exchange between Lana and Lex in the mansion, and he starts to walk away, as so many of these mansion scenes have ended with someone walking out. And then he stops and he closes the door. And it's such a chilling moment. And it's like, well, like, this is not what we've seen before. What is this? And it's such a dark turn. As much as Lex had really been going down a dark path, this is the end of season 6, but to physically strike Lana after she says that Clark means more to her than he ever will. It's, again, one of those moments, especially when we look at Lex's evolution, that so stands out to me. And obviously that was a show built to show that downfall over the course of many seasons. You know, kind of circling back to Superboy, I think like we're getting at the same idea here, that this Luthor Unleashed, there was something here. And I think if it had just kind of been unpacked a little bit more, and if we had been allowed to see more of the good Lex and more of what Lana potentially saw in him, that got so short-circuited. You only got so far with that. But had a little bit more been able to play out, I think it would have put some more meat on the bone for the end of the first season. But so it goes.
Yeah, it is what it is. I consider, and again, this isn't me bagging on Lois and Clark because I love the first season of that show. And there's episodes in the second and third season that I like, but I look at Superboy and Lois and Clark as a mountain. You're going up the mountain. Everything is great with Superboy. You're at the top of the mountain at the first season of Lois and Clark, and then slowly you start descending it. And it's kind of fascinating that the shows both were 4 seasons long and both had completely separate quality arcs in terms of the writing and what they were accomplishing with it and how silly things got. But I think for the I think it was a good season closer. I could have done without Lex being a monk at the end.
I totally forgot about that. I thought it just ended with Superboy standing in the field with the weapon. Yeah. And I was like, all right. And I was this close to hitting. And then I was like, oh, wait, I forgot. They're hiding out as monks.
And he's got like the Friar Tuck hair. The Friar Tuck. Like, okay, Lex, I understand you having different wigs for different situations. I mean, it's just like there's that great scene in Superman Returns where they walk into the bathroom and there's all the wigs on the heads and stuff. And it's creepy. Why would you have a wig that only has partial hair? This makes absolutely no sense.
I know. The last thing I'll say maybe in their defense is at least in that episode, they really did show his vanity as he's constantly fixing his hair, especially in advance of the date with Lana. So the idea that he would have that much of a turn with the balding tracks a little bit more. Well, I'll give them that, but
yeah. And the last thing I'll say on that is something you touched on. The thing people forget about Adventure Comics 271 is, like you said, it's not just that he went bald. If you read that story, he's mad because he thinks Superboy was jealous of him. And then he spends the rest of the story trying to prove himself to the town of Smallville. And every time he fails, those people are awful to him. I mean, just like, so at the end of it, I would like if that happened to me, I'd end up being Superman's archenemy, because it's just like, not only did my friend betray me, but this entire town is turned on me. So I'm just going to go, I'm on my villain path now. Where here, the villain path was more, that was kind of a marathon. This was a sprint.
Yes, very much so. Now, as we head into season 2, we already talked a bit about the plastic surgery aspect of all of this, but just speaking about Sherman Howard as a performer overall, I've seen social media posts, I don't know if these were recent or a while back, of you likening him to Anthony Starr, Homelander on The Boys. And I agree with you. Can you explain why?
Sherman Howard is an excellent performer in that, just in general, he gives nuanced performances. Even when he's dealing with these over-the-top scripts, he can go from insane to darkly scary in a heartbeat. But he acts with his face. Like, his face is, I really want to dig in to see if he was a theater actor, primarily, because the way he is able to go from that kind of like, I'm angry, and then he kind of smiles and he's like, completely different, still chilling, especially as Homelander is developed on The Boys, which I am surprised I like that show as much as I do. Because when it first came on, I was just like, I don't want to see evil Superman, but I like Anthony Starr. Because I found Banshee during the pandemic and fell in love with that show.
It's so good. So I'm sure I've said this at some point, but that was such an under the radar show on Cinemax. And one of my buddies from my old comic book shop, he was like, you got to watch Banshee. And I was like, and eventually my wife and I sat and we were like, this is the best. And so many people, I would like to think that after the success of The Boys, more people have found Banshee, but I'm sure it's still one of those things that a lot of people haven't seen. Like, it's so good. And then when we saw him on The Boys, we didn't recognize him at first. It took a minute. We're like, oh, that's him. He's so good. The fact that you can find, I mean, appealing is not the right word for the Homelander, but the idea that you can find him humorous, right, despite all these despicable things, is such a testament to the writing, but I think mostly to what Starr brings to it. So I'm totally with you.
And it's how their facial expressions inform the performance. There are certain actors that can perform just with their eyes. And I know that sounds like a weird thing to say, but when you're, especially when you're dealing with television where the face is sometimes so huge on the screen, it's very apparent. I remember the director of the Flash movie was talking about this, how he didn't understand what a great actor Michael Keaton was until like they'd be shooting something. And he'd be like, Michael didn't react at all. But then they go to their digital, island and all that. And he's seeing all the subtle things he's doing it. Anthony Starr in both this show and on Banshee, it's all in his face. Like everything that character is feeling is there. And I think Sherman Howard does the same thing with Lex Luthor. And they both kind of have similar facial structures, which led me to be thinking, man, Anthony Starr would make a great Lex Luthor.
Yeah. Here's the thing that I'll say, and it's funny. I'm glad that I rewatched these episodes because I had watched a couple of Lex episodes from Superboy a couple of years ago when we did our Lex event, but it was really just to get a sampling of this iteration. And I wasn't yet ready to really take in the Superboy show, so I only got so far with that. And then now, over these past couple of months, I binged the whole series. But then in advance of this recording, I sat down and I rewatched virtually all of the Lex episodes. And I'm glad I did, because it definitely gave me a deeper appreciation for what Sherman Howard was doing in these episodes. And yeah, to your point, his ability to shift from funny to sinister on a dime is really striking. And on top of that, he has a physicality to him. He's a large guy. He's a big guy. He's tall.
Yeah,
There's a physicality to him that you don't typically get with Lex. I'm looking forward to see whatever Nicholas Hoult does in the forthcoming Superman movie. I know one of the names that they were kicking around, or that was being reported as being considered, was Alexander Skarsgård. And at the time I was like, that would be interesting to see how that dynamic would play out. But so I like the physicality. I like the ability to turn on a dime. To be honest, the only thing I didn't like was the maniacal cackling that felt very much inspired by Jack Nicholson's Joker. Once again, the inspiration of the 89 Batman movie. And it's not all the time, and there are enough variations of the character that it's not a one-note thing or anything like that. But that's the only time where I kind of bump up against the performance a little bit, is when we veer into that. But really, by and large, this is a very strong take on Lex.
Yeah, it's JMD Mateus tweeted that he's the best Lex Luthor you've never heard of. And it's like, I'm almost just like, DeMatteis just handed Anthony the title to this episode, or the subtitle to this episode. And just the other thing about it is you get to see this guy's acting chops throughout the course of his run. In the first episode, he's playing two different characters, and one character is kind of pleasant, kind of, outgoing. Then you have Lex, who's very broad but sinister, but then Lex has to play this guy. And it's just like, again, for a half-hour show that was syndicated and not in every market, and probably, I think it was mentioned in both your interview with Gerard Christopher and All-Star Superfans that the first season just didn't do well and was like at the bottom of the ratings, and that they needed to turn it around. For all of that, he just brings something. He brings a gravitas, but I also think because of the type of actor he is, he brought a legitimacy to the show that the show didn't have in the first season.
I think that's fair. Yeah, he has a presence, and the fact that he does become this recurring villain over the remaining seasons. Like, when you get a Lex episode, there's going to be something to it. And actually going back to what you were saying a minute ago about the eyes and the face, last week I had Rob from All Star on and we talked about Bizarro on the series and what a highlight that depiction was and what the performer Douglas Barry Myers was able to do with his body language, with those movements to convey so much of the Bizarro character. So yeah, I mean, both of these guys really, really tremendous performances. Now, yeah.
I was about to say, best Bizarro ever? Yes, actually, I would say that this is the best iteration of Bizarro across all mediums.
Yes.
Was on this show.
Yeah, no, I would go to bat for that. No, I wholeheartedly agree. Absolutely. Now, in this two-part kickoff to season 2, again, we talked about how he underwent the surgery and he assumes the identity of Warren Eckworth and uses one of the weapons that the company had developed. I think this is a misread of a certain scene on my part, but let me just bring this up. Are we 100% sure that Lex purposely modified his appearance to look like Warren Eckworth? Because I swear, like, as I'm watching it, I feel like he's almost surprised when it matches. But it has to be that he intended.
Yeah, it was definitely on purpose because he wanted to get in the company so that he could juice up that rocket so that he could use it to kill Superboy. Now he only ends up crippling him temporarily, and that's the thing about seasons 2, 3, and 4, but especially season 2. I was shocked that in 1989 they were going as Silver Age with these concepts as they were, because the entire thing, or Bronze Age, this felt like a Carrie Bates story from like 1988, where he would do something to Superman and Superman would be in a wheelchair and he would have to learn to walk again. And this is going to be my potentially controversial statement, and it is nothing against Gerard Christopher, because any actor who walks into a role, even when they're good right away, there is a feeling out period of that character. And I think Sherman Howard being so strong makes you kind of overlook the fact that Gerard Christopher is not as confident in his performance as he would eventually become with the character. Because, he doesn't look as comfortable in the suit. And I really don't like second season Clark at all.
No, that's been a recurring theme on these episodes here. You're in good company.
Like seasons 3 and 4, I think they struck the right balance. But seeing as nerdy as he was in this, I was just like, God. So having Sherman Howard as Lex coming out of the gate hot, I think made everything else kind of even out. It balanced everything. So by the time that Gerard Christopher was on his A game, then when the two of them were coming at each other, it was like a prize fight almost.
I like that way of looking at it, because going back to what I was saying before, part of me feels like maybe they could have just held off on the new Lex until a little bit later in the season, as opposed to having all of this change right up front. But I think it did serve that purpose that you just described. So I can get on board with that. And along the lines of the versatility that Sherman Howard displays, I mean, yes, in this initial 2-parter playing Lex and playing Warren Eckworth, but over the course of the rest of the series, he'll play Clark when we have the Bodyswap episode. He'll play a number of alternate universe iterations when we get into the Road's Not Taken and the Road to Hell 2-part events. So you really do get to see him flex his muscles, and he writes 2 episodes.
Yep.
He writes Mind Games and Darla Goes Ballistic, 2 standout episodes. So
yeah, definitely. Like, if Know Thine Enemy didn't exist, Mind Games would have been the best Lex episode of the entire series.
Agreed. Yeah.
I just think Know Thine Enemy, one, it was a 2-parter, and it just dug into this character's background in a way. J.M. DeMatteis, I'm going to ask this, and I'm not saying it as like an insult. Have you read a lot of his comics?
A decent amount. Not as much as I would like, but a decent amount. Like, I read some of his Spectacular Spider-Man, and I certainly read his Superman work, and one-shots like Where Is Thy Sting and things like that.
DeMatteis is a very humanistic writer. He is less interested in the beat 'em ups as he is into digging into who these characters are. And if you read his stuff, abusive parents are kind of like one of his things that he'll use to explore a villain. So I wasn't surprised to see that. But even in these early episodes, the thing I like about this two-parter, the initial two-parter, is it goes from scary to creepy to like subtly funny. Like when he's trying to marry Lana, which is just crazy on its own. Okay, so let's just put that out there, that his plan to marry Lana makes absolutely no sense, but you go with it in the episode because that's the plot. He's got a dummy with a video screen, and this is showing his intelligence because, it's 1989. We don't. I mean, we're doing this right now, and it's like nothing. But you see the priest on the other end, and he's got a gun to his head, and it's played for laughs. It's not played to be like sinister or scary. So it's like this journey almost. It's like a roller coaster ride where you don't know where this is going. And I think everything about that just makes it work so much better. And he hits Lana again. Poor Lana keeps getting slapped around by this guy.
I know. No, that's the thing. As much as they really, like you said, really tried to distance themselves from the season 1 iteration, and by the time we get to Lex's subsequent appearances, again, unless I'm really just forgetting something, I mean, he never references his time at Schuster or the fact that they knew each other there. But in this initial two-parter, again, his infatuation with Lana, right, directly carries over from what we had seen before. I mean, he forcibly kisses her and, again, tries to force her into this wedding. This is where we're introduced to Darla, played by Tracy Roberts. He hires her at the strip club to be his assistant and then to teach Lana some bedroom, show her the ropes or get her to participate. It's, again, very creepy, kind of this angle that we go in. But yeah, it shows a lot of the different components of his character, I suppose.
So I have two gags for the second part. One, it looks like Darla is about to head to a Whitesnake video. Yes. She is very late 80s. And two, and you'll appreciate this, I really would have liked them to put in Hearts on Fire when Superboy was going through his training montage.
That's the thing, man. All I was thinking about was Rocky, and it was the right time frame, and it so would have been perfect. So on that note, I mean, Superboy gets blasted with this weapon at the end of that first episode, and his powers are out of whack, and he can't walk. I mean, they really hit him with the 1-2 punch here, and he wheels himself in a wheelchair to confront Lex ultimately, and he takes another blast from the miniature version of this weapon, and that, of course, whenever something goes wrong, if you get hit with the same thing again, then you're fine. Yeah,
that's a very Silver Age approach to storytelling.
This is so minor, but I have to point it out because it made me laugh when he wheels himself in to confront Lex. And Lex is talking about all the things he's done, and he's like, "Why'd you come here like this?" And Superboy's like, "To get your confession on tape." And he holds up a tape, not a recorder of any sort. He literally has a VHS tape in his lap. And he's like, "I came here to get your confession." It's like, how? How?
Well, that belt buckle also serves as a camcorder.
It's like, come on, guys. Like, put something there.
My least favorite moment of the second part is at the very end, and they're all in Andy and Clark's room. And Lana's just like, God, it was just such a bad time. And Clark says, "Well, it's a difficult time for all of us, Lana." Okay, one, she doesn't know you're Superboy. You just looked really insensitive there.
Yeah, totally. And also, it's like she was put through the ringer far more than...
Yeah, really? Were you kidnapped by an evil genius and tried to force to marry him and smacked around and had a girl from a strip club who... I feel like Darla is one of the secret weapons of some of the Lex episodes because
totally.
she is like in this initial thing, like she is not the ditz that she sometimes comes off as later. But let's also take a step back for a second, Anthony. This is a Superboy show aimed at a younger audience with a scene at a strip club.
I know.
Only in syndication, man. This would have never been on network.
I know, it really is wild. But yeah, if Leo is like Otis in season 1, Darla is like our Miss Tessmacher here. Mm-hmm. But I agree. not every single appearance of Lex, but most of Lex's appearances from season 2 forward, Darla will be there. And again, gets a spotlight episode with Darla Goes Ballistic, which is great. So yeah, I do think she was an unsung hero of all. I looked her up on IMDb. Seems like she stopped acting in the mid 90s. So I don't know what she's up to now, but yeah, she did a great job on this for sure. And at the end of this 2-parter, right out of the golden age of comics, we get Lex surviving the electric chair.
Yep.
He takes this pill and he's able to withstand and absorb the electricity and busts out.
Yeah, that's to answer your question, I think she's been to at least 1 or 2 Superman celebrations.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so and really that's what I think these actors really need to do is start getting out there if they can. It's funny, Sherman Howard is actually invited to conventions more for being the main zombie in Day of the Dead than anything else. Because if I ever saw him at a convention, I would just nonstop sit there and gush about how much I loved him as Lex Luthor. But also, again, those Silver Age elements of him, like, and the effects of him, like with the electricity, and he gets in the car and he's like, "Don't touch me." But I have to ask, I have to ask this question. And I know it's plot armor and that's how these things work out. They were right behind him. How did he get to that car? And then suddenly they're like on the other side of the prison.
I have no answer other than they were probably just so stunned. I mean, who's ever survived an electrocution before? So, well, and kind of another instance of in syndication, to actually show what would have been an execution. I mean, it always makes me think of Superman, the animated series, and the late Mr. Kent, and you actually see the, the execution in the gas chamber. It's like, whoa, this is a kid's cartoon. What are we doing?
Yes. I remember seeing that and just being stunned that they did it, and they did it in the way they did it. But it's also further proof that if you find out that Clark Kent is Superman and you're not a supporting character that they like, you're gonna die.
You're either going to that cabin in the mountains or you're going to the gas chamber.
The cabin in the mountains.
One way or the other. You're done.
I'm enjoying that as a running gag on your Adventures of Superman show, by the way. That it's just like anytime anything happens, they're going to the cabin. That's where we're going to put them.
I just love this headcanon I'm developing of just all these people and just the amount of work that now has to go into maintaining this and the burden. And for George Reeves Clark in particular, think about how frustrated he would be. He was like, I got to go up there and do another supply run to the village up there. We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On to banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. Creator and podcaster Perry Constantine, host of Superhero Cinephiles, has a special offer for listeners of this podcast. Visit percivalconstantine.com/DFK or click the link in the show notes. Fill out the form and then get 2 free novels and 1 free superhero short story. The novels are Vanguard, Heroes Forged, an Avengers-inspired team of superheroes, and Ronin Born, a cyberpunk superhero novel set in a futuristic, fascist Japan. The short story is Omega Knights, Fire and Lightning, a Power Rangers-inspired prequel to an upcoming serial. Take advantage of this offer today, and be sure to catch Superhero Cinephiles on all major podcast platforms. Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of 2 of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. But in any event, once we move past this initial 2-part, we can kind of jump around in our conversation. We don't have to go kind of episode by episode, but just kind of big picture with this Lex, because I know I've seen posts of yours of sort of categorizing our on-screen Lexes and kind of what
Yep.
box they might kind of fit into. I mean, my take on the Sherman Howard incarnation, it feels very much like the pre-crisis outlaw mad scientist version of the character, but as we later learn in Know Thine Enemy, with the post-crisis backstory for the character with the abusive home life. Is that kind of how you see it?
Yeah, that's exactly how I would put it. It's very, very. I said it before. It's very Carrie Bates in terms of how they deal with Lex. A little Elliot S. Maggin, I would say too, in terms of just them liking the character. I mean, then you look at things like Roads Not Taken. That two-parter is that you get to. I think a lot of people focus on it's your show, so I can say this, the Superboy of it all. In that you got to see different versions of Superboy, especially in Roads Not Taken. You had the Superboy that killed Lex, and then you have Sovereign, who is flat out murdered by a suicide bomb with Lana.
Yeah.
I had forgotten about that. But I think Lex gets overlooked in that because Lex going to that other Earth where his counterpart had died and getting to like become a public figure and this messianic figure, and he's controlling the crowd so that when Superboy shows up, everybody hates Superboy and loves him. And one of my favorite moments of that is he's just like, the other Superboy shows up in his costume, because at first he's got his Superboy from the Reign of the Superman look.
The jacket, I know. Right? It
Jacket
is.
and sunglasses.
Superboy's the blueprint. The Superboy TV show is the blueprint.
But when he shows up in costume and Lex is like, "Oh, it's you," he's like, "No, it's not." Like, which one are you? I'm the one that killed you. And you see the look of like fear finally, like, oh, this is a Superboy I can't mess with like this. I just think that between that and the Roads to Hell, where he plays a Lex that is subservient to Darla initially, which was an interesting twist, but then turns the table on that.
Yeah.
But him also being the resistance fighter in Roads Not Taken, who's in love with Lana, and they're a couple. And then the Dr. Lex from Roads to Hell, who helps save Superboy. Like, all of these performances are they're all singular. There's no bleed over. Even when he's playing like bad guy Lex, it is a completely different bad guy Lex.
Totally. And so next week we're going to be doing a top 10 countdown of the best episodes of the series. And I'm sure those alternate universe episodes will come up and we could talk about them more. But I wanted to include them here. And I love the rundown that you gave because, yes, there's a lot to do with Superboy, but you are also getting all of these other iterations of Lex as well. And it really is fascinating. The other thing that I was thinking, though, when we talk about what category this Lex fits into is they could have gone the route of him maintaining that Warren Eckworth identity for a longer period of time and essentially being the post-crisis version of the character with this public facade. And it also makes me think, of course, from the post-crisis comics of Lex Luthor II when he posed as his own son in the cloned body. And there's just kind of this idea like it's really Lex, but nobody knows except the audience. Obviously, they didn't go that way. And based on the episodes we got, I think they made the right call. But is there any part of you who would have wanted the businessman facade to remain for any period of time?
You know, that's a really excellent question. And me being such a post-crisis kid, you would think my answer would be yes. But this show is so much its own thing with everything it did that I honestly think they did the right thing of making him more of the Silver Bronze Age version of the character rather than the post-crisis. With elements sprinkled in, because like if you look at any of the villains on this show, they completely rethought who Metallo was. They completely, they even brought in the Yellow Perry. What? But I think by having him be this version of the character, I think it was more for the general audience than fans of the comics. because the general audience watching this show, like if you just were just John Q. Public who didn't read comics and you're home on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon and you turn on Superboy and he's an evil businessman, you're going to be thinking, no, that's not what Gene Hackman was. And that's who I know. Gene Hackman was in 3 Superman films by that point. Well, 2.5. He filmed 1, 2. It's a whole thing. But I think to a certain extent, and this is something that I've had to come to grips with as a aging comic book fan, seeing comic book culture become more ascendant in pop culture. Even when you had like the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man films, it wasn't like it would be like in 2008 or 2012. And with all the TV shows and such, I think at this point, especially with the Salkins, one of the Salkins being involved, you lean into what people are familiar with. So by doing that as a jumping off point to get him to look different and then switch him to this version of Lex, I think it was just more for palatable to a general audience than trying to. I'm going to finish a sentence in here any minute now, I promise. I think the other thing is the show was not built to have him have a secret identity.
Sure. Yeah. No, I agree. Like that's the thing. But it's an interesting question. I wanted to get your take, but no, ultimately I agree. And I think that the other reason why this works is because Lex was not a series regular. We talk about this with the depiction of Clark and how I think the bumbling shtick can have, that's still not my preferred version, but it can have more of a place in the movie where it's a more discrete period of time that you're spending with that. But if it's a weekly show, I think we kind of need something beyond that. Like what we would get in seasons 3 and 4 or season 1 of the show or the George Reeves show. And then similarly with Lex, I think if he's going to be a series regular, like Lois and Clark season 1, then I think that public facade, it allows him to kind of be there without having to constantly account for like, how is he just always breaking out or whatnot. But here he pops up a few times a season. I do think this works.
The one thing that drove me actually pretty much the only thing that kind of drove me nuts through this whole thing is like episodes end and they just end. So you don't see Superboy like in Darla Goes Ballistic's a good example of that. Like everyone's having kind of it ain't no trouble at all, like laugh at the end of the episode. And it's just like, is Superboy going to take him back to jail?
So So I'm 100% with you. This is one of the things a couple episodes ago, I had Ed Gross on, Voices from Krypton author. And we talked about just kind of the overview of the series generally. And we talked about Clark's arc, if he has one in the show. But one of the things that I pointed out that I kind of realized as I was watching these episodes, like a lot of them, there's no denouement. So it's like we have the big climax, but then that aftermath, those heart-to-heart conversations, like you don't see them and you don't always see what happens after. So yes, the Darla Goes Ballistic episode is a great example where you don't see Superboy haul them back off to jail. You have to assume that he does, yet you don't see it. And of course they're probably just running around free the next time you see them. The other thing too that compounds the issue here is that Lex is going to be executed. It's not just a matter of, he's going to be life in prison and he keeps breaking out. It's like they're ready to fry this guy. So there's really a ticking clock on all of this, yet he always beats it.
I think really outside of, like we were saying before, outside of Know Thine Enemy, Mind Games was an episode I remember watching when it was first on. And one of my older sisters, the one I'm closest in age with, we fought like cats and dogs when we were teenagers because we were brother and sister. It's what you do. And she would always kind of mock the things that I watched. But she actually watched that episode with me and she was like kind of engaged in it. Everybody focuses that I hear talk about it, I'd be king for a day. Because it's one of the perfect examples of a bottle episode where you have just the two characters in a singular space and all they're doing is talking. And it's just, and I'm glad it's like Sherman Howard had some writing chops. I'm going to tell you that right now, because the dialogue those two had and the nuance that both characters got But my favorite moment is he's throwing the kryptonite at him and he says, "I hate that damn curl in the middle of your forehead. I will never not laugh at that line." Because it is a joke line. It's not like a bust a gut, but it's just like one of those things where he's just finding things to hate about him at that point.
Yeah. That one is a standout. So that's a season 3 episode, Mind Games, where Lex once again takes Lana and lures Superboy into this mine where there's kryptonite. The mine collapses. Lana just makes it out, but is trapped, pinned down. And that leaves Lex and Superboy in this collapsed mine with kryptonite. Just like you said, having this heart-to-heart, like talking it out, trying to figure a way out. And ultimately having to cooperate. And that's kind of the other thing to continue to give Sherman Howard his flowers, where you buy him as funny, you buy him as sinister. But in the episodes, this is a perfect example. Darla Goes Ballistic is another great example where he ultimately has to work and cooperate with Superboy. And you buy him in that respect. It's so funny because it's not like the show truly builds a friendship between the two of them, but it's like, as opposed to Smallville, where they start off as buddies and then it all deteriorates. Here, as the series goes on, we get these couple of instances where they actually have to work together and find some kind of common ground. And I love those moments. They're particularly interesting. And again, I think he brings that out in the character where you kind of buy that he would be able to cross that.
Yeah, like him having to get Superboy. It's like, no, you can do this. You can do like really getting him to melt the lead, and then he turns on him. But there's that great moment at the end of the episode where he's just like, "I'm going to hate myself in the morning for not killing you," and then he runs off. And it's like the one time that I bought his escape.
Yes,
because
yes.
Superboy was not in the best of shape at that point.
And earlier on, when Lex is asking Superboy, like, what do you want? Like, what do you really? Because there's an earlier exchange where Lex is essentially saying something to the effect of, you know, you don't have what it takes to, you know, to just take what you want, like money, women, power. He's like, that's not what I want. Like, I want to make the world a better place. And Lex doesn't totally buy that. And it's so antithetical to what Lex wants, to be king for a day. And so then later he pushes Superboy further. He's like, what do you really want? And Superboy actually busts a joke where he's like, why don't you just leave me alone? But then when pressed further, Superboy's like, to be, I don't know if he says normal or ordinary.
Yeah, he just wants to have a wife and kids and a family and
the freedom to compromise.
Yeah.
Which was great. And when you talk about kind of the deftness of the writing, when he's like, you know, the way too that Gerard delivers, like the freedom to compromise. And then you get to the end where Lex is like, you won't let me go, like, even after everything we've been through? He's like, no, like, I can't. And he's like, you could just say you'd let me go and then grab me. He's like, I can't. It's like, he really does abide by this code that cannot accommodate compromise. And they're not beating you over the head with it. Like, it's a very well put together episode.
Yeah. And that also goes to kind of the thing that I forgot about this series is the arc Superboy went on in terms of becoming who he was going to become, which is something they play with in Roads Not Taken, where you get to meet the other, the legally binding not Superman, because we can't call him Superman. The one thing I did notice about that episode is that at some point, just about every live action iteration of Clark Kent just gets into comfy sweaters. You got Christopher Reeve in Superman 2. You've got Tyler Hoechlin at the end of season 2 of Superman and Lois. That's old Superman in this one. He's wearing
that's
a cardigan.
The cosplay we need, right? That's the cosplay we need to see. I feel like there's a lot of untapped potential here, relatively easy. I think that's a way to go. The one time that my wife and I cosplayed at New York Comic Con in 2017, I think was when we did it. We went as Matt Murdock and Elektra from the Netflix series. So it's like, I wore a suit and I got the red glasses and I was good to go, and a briefcase. So I like a very kind of easy minimalist cosplay. So yeah, I might give that some thought. I don't know. That's a little bit more obscure though. That's kind of a deeper cut.
You go to Dragon Con, you'll fit right in. They're all there. Dragon Con is all about the deep cut cosplay. But no, I just really like the ending of that of Mind Games, in that there's a relationship here between these characters. And I think it goes to the depth of the relationship between Luthor and Superman just in general. A lot of people like who's Superman's arch enemy? It's Lex Luthor. Well, he's just a guy, but it's more than that. It is more that he's more than just a normal human. They are the opposite of each other. Superboy and Superman is all of these powers. All can fly, shoot laser out of his eyes, which they don't focus on as much in this series as they would in later iterations. He can do all these things, but he's got this singular focus that I have to use these abilities to help people, to the point where he thinks he kills somebody in a 2-part episode, and he gives up being Superboy. He doesn't go off in space and fight Mongol, but it's kind of a similar vibe. Whereas Lex is everything a human can be, but it's all selfish. It's all for his own gratification. The best Lex Luthors are the ones that do not see themselves as a bad guy. They see themselves as the rightful, to put it in really simplistic terms, ruler of the world, whether that's actual like Silver and Bronze Age Lex, who was trying to be that, to post-crisis Lex, who runs for president because he gets jealous of the effect Superman has on the public, and he wants to have that respect level with the general public again, because of the power that comes with that. And you get that in this series where everything he does because he thinks he's better than everybody else and he needs to prove it. And that's where you get Know Thine Enemy. Know Thine Enemy. What I love about this episode is that Lex is going to blow up the city with him and Darla in it. Like, he's done. He has made up his mind. He's got his robot double, going back to the acting of Sherman Howard, of playing the robot and him. And you find out it's because he thinks his sister died, the only person he ever cared about. And you get the whole backstory. Like, there is a scene in that where they don't show it, but you hear Lex's dad beating him. And I'm like, oh my God. Holy crap, that's vicious.
Yeah, that's a powerful one for sure. And that's the J.M. DeMatteis written 2-parter where, yes, Lex now is bringing forth this nuclear Armageddon, and Superboy tracks the radio waves. It's a decoy, though, and it leads him to one of Lex's old labs where there are all these discs containing his memories. And so Superboy essentially enters Lex's memories and relives the events of his life. And so you see this abusive home life, this father who's constantly beating the mother and sister Lena and Lex, and it's Superboy in the place of Lex, which adds an interesting component to it as well. And you get to the point where you see Superboy in the real world in that chair with tears coming down his face as he's living these events and these beatings. And it definitely gives you insight into the character. And it comes, many things were interesting about it, but especially how deep into the series it comes. I mean, we're in season 4 territory here. And I don't know, part of me is like, man, I kind of wish we had gotten this earlier. I don't know if that it would like vastly change the way I see the character, but it's just kind of interesting to me kind of how deep into the proceedings we get this backstory. But this very much in keeping with those post-crisis comics where Lex and Perry White were contemporaries, and Lex has this abusive home life, and he murders his parents, and then he's placed in this foster home, and his foster sister is Lena, the one person who allegedly he ever truly loved, who's killed by the abusive foster father. And we get a lot of that, or at least pieces of that, in that unauthorized biography of Lex Luthor. And then there's the issue of Superman from Dan Jurgens where baby Lena is born, and that's where we get more of the pieces of that.
Stone cold classic top 5 Lex Luthor stories of all time.
Agreed. I went back and I looked at it again, and it's so good. It's so good. But so this is very much in keeping with that. Obviously, we don't get into the business of a foster family, and here Lena is his biological sister, the same way she was in the pre-crisis comics. Now, the pre-crisis comics, there's no abusive household angle, is there?
No, it's funny because they changed their last name to Thorol
right.
because, you know, if you're going to change your name in the Silver Age, it's going to be an anagram
Obviously.
of the name you had. And, you know, Lena was more of a Supergirl character initially, which is kind of like one of those fascinating things you never think of. But yeah, his parents were horrified by him. They were upstanding citizens, and their son became a criminal. Whereas here, you have a father that is jealous and insecure about the fact that his son is going to eclipse him because he's so much smarter than he is. Like there's like the first scene, it's just like, where's Lex? Oh, he's taking that test. And you see that, oh, you're smarter than me, and he hits him, and just the look on Gerard Christopher's face. But it's also when you realize that the father's hitting Lena as well, that more than anything, I don't think he killed them because of abusing him. He killed those people because of what they did to his sister.
Agreed.
And I don't, that's never like explicitly said. But also when you see the look of relief on his face when he sees her again, and then she rejects him, and you see that darkness come over him. Like that whole ending is fantastic. Just everything about it. And it's so subtle because it's the robot that disengages the nuclear threat.
Right.
And Lex turns him off, and he's got his hands up. And he's just like, I never loved her. And Lana looks at the robot. He's just like, yeah, sure, Lex. What, you know, yeah, everything about that is just so good.
I know it's interesting. I mean, I agree with everything you were saying before about why Lex is the arch enemy, and certainly the ego is such a core component of the character. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, I think it's that the thing I always come back to is that inability to love. And mm-hmm. whether to truly love, and whether he comes from wealth or from poverty, whether he spends time in Smallville or not, whether he's the businessman or the outlaw, I think that absence of love in his past and that inability to love in the present is such a driver. And then Lena is such a fascinating component of that because she's the one he actually does love. If he does, I mean, I guess that's kind of a question. I mean, maybe we get our answer at the end of the two-parter with the android, but I mean, do we believe that Lex truly is capable of at least loving her in a true way?
I do. He won't admit it to himself, but he does. And the only reason he won't admit it to himself is that she rejected him. But going back to our earlier part of the conversation, where did Lex's money come from to go to college? It was from the insurance policy, so it can track if you
yeah, I'm 100% with you. We use our headcanon when we need to, and I think this is an instance where I could totally go with that. That gave him his start, and then he concocted this backstory for himself. Mm-hmm. So I'm totally on board with it. It's interesting, like we both hit on this, that the subsequent seasons of the show really distance themselves from the season 1 version of the character. I did read, and I talked about this a little bit more last week, but I did read that 22 issue Superboy, the comic book mm-hmm. Tie-in series. And there I feel like they kind of blend the worlds a little bit more, where he'll make more reference to his days at Schuster and things like that. So it felt more like a continuation as opposed to just like a hard reset of the character. But no, that Know Thine Enemy two-parter. Oh, and by the way, so not only we talked about it was written by J.M. DeMatteis, directed by Brian Spicer, who directed the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie, which I love. And I say that unironically. I revisited it on my Power Rangers podcast that I did last year. It's great. And he does there's some cool, I like the look of this episode, especially when we're in the memories and kind of these kind of more skewed angles. I dug it.
I will admit I was 19 in the summer of 1995. And even though I was not a watcher of the show, we went to see that film, and me and the girl I was dating at the time. There was a funny thing. The movie kept cutting out, and that was the days where when you walked into the theater would show like ads for local businesses and stuff. And it kept cutting out and going back to those ads. And finally, when it did it for the third time, I just said, oh, so it's like the TV show. Every once in a while, we're just gonna stop for a commercial. I will say, you could, somebody of my age could make fun of that movie. The only thing I will poke fun at is that Jason David Frank's dialogue for the first 20 minutes of the film is "Thanks, man." That's all he freaking says at the beginning of that movie.
Listen, no arguments there. All I'll say is this. If you were 8 at the time and you were watching the TV series, I mean, it was mind-blowing in general, but also the fact that Zordon's containment tube was shattered and you saw him lying there as this old shriveled guy in a turtleneck. It's like, what the F is going on here?
Dude, I was 11 years old when Masters of the Universe was in theaters, so I'm totally with you in spirit on that. It's why I never make fun of things anymore. I mean, I'll poke fun at things and be snarky, but I won't really go after anything because something is everybody's favorite.
Honestly, like that's something that I think really cultivated as I've been doing this podcast, because I am honest, right? And I do give my opinion on things, but I try not usually, I think mostly I succeed, right? Of coming down too hard on anything or punching down or just making fun without offering any kind of true analysis, because anything we're talking about, especially in the Superman realm, comics generally, someone loves it and someone else also worked hard on it and intended well with it. 99% of the time, the intentions were good and they tried hard. So I always try to be mindful of that. And the other thing, and I want to say this to you because this really stuck in my head, something that you put up on social media about, kind of the more time you spend mining this mythology, as we all do on our podcast here, those of us as fellow Superman podcasters, like the more holistic your view becomes, and the things that you kind of hold as gospel, like, well, this is the way, you sort of realize, well, it was that way in the story that kind of resonated with you at a formative time, but that doesn't mean that's the only way it can be presented.
I watched a TikTok back when the David Cornsweet costume reveal happened. And I like this guy. I've seen some of his content before. He's got good comic book content on TikTok, which is not easy to do. But he said something like, I'm glad they did it because now I know this isn't Superman. This isn't my Superman. And I'm like, okay, those are two completely different concepts. Because there is my Superman. There is no definitive platonic ideal of this character. He's been around for 85 years, and he's gone through multiple iterations in comic books and on stage and screen and animated and live action. There is no one take that is perfect and everybody can agree on. It's all of what, like you just said, what grabs you at a certain age. And I think this show and this version of Lex, and same kind of with Lex Luthor, is a good example of that, because as low budget as this show was, and as fast as they had to make these episodes and crank them out, because that's just what syndicated television was like. If you really look at this series as a whole, and I kind of envied you for a while because you were going through the series for the first time, because I watched it as it aired, and then Jeff and I talked about it on From Crisis to Crisis as we were going along. I have to admit that we had to go through less than legitimate means at that time because it was 2009, 2010. So there were no DVDs, but eBay was there, which is sad because one episode was screwed up and I was kind of disappointed. But as I went through it there, and as I was going through these episodes now, the overall feeling I got is this is such a nuanced and important version of this character that no one talks about, but it is just as legitimate as Tom Welling, as Brandon Routh, as Christopher Reeve, as George Reeves, as Kirk Allen. They're all, as Henry Cavill, every version of these characters is legitimate. It's just whether or not you like it or not is where the divisions fall. And I think we as Superman fans, not you and me specifically, but just the royal we, get so caught up. I compare it to different sects of Christianity. I'm not trying to bring religion into this, but if you look at Catholics versus Baptist versus evangelicals versus Unitarians, everybody, there's so many versions that think that their way is the right way, and it's just not. It's just, you just find the Superman that you like. And it was funny listening, not funny, haha, but it was interesting listening to your interview with Gerard Christopher, that he kept saying Superman. He hardly said Superboy through that. And I'm like, that dude thought he was playing Superman the entire time, and that changed the entire show for me.
Yeah.
It really did.
I clocked that as well. But no, your points are all well taken, and I wholeheartedly agree. And honestly, like, that's where I am now in my journey with Superboy specifically, where Clark needs to learn how to be Superman somehow. And we have a multiple, we've seen that presented in a number of different ways. And to me now, and this is not how I felt a few months ago, right? I really always had misgivings about this chapter in the character's history, but now I look at it and it's like, no, this is a way to have him learn to be Superman. This is a valid interpretation. I enjoyed a lot about this series. I've enjoyed a lot of what I've looked at in terms of the Superboy comic. So does every version need to do that? No. But for versions that do, there's something to it. And yes, whether something is Superman versus my Superman, like, that's the thing. We can like or not like anything, but there's a difference between that and, it's not a valid interpretation. So yeah, it's something that I always think about, but just kind of that idea of, like, the deeper you get into all of this, because my perspective has shifted so much, right? Like, since I started all of this, and I'm grateful for it, because I can now enjoy things that before either was just like a black box to me, or I really was dismissive of. And now it's like, no. And anytime you can enjoy something new, it's great.
The thing about looking at it that way for me is, what I have to remember when I'm looking at, like when I see some rando on Twitter, sorry, X, or any social media, like, with what I think is a bad Superman take, I rarely engage with those for two reasons. One, that's your day. You go down that road, that's the rest of your day. I did that back in February, and I immediately regretted it. But two, I don't know where that person is. Because, yeah, you, me, other people, and I'm not trying to put us on pedestals or anything, I think it's insane to get into a character this much to a certain extent. I'm not saying like it's a borderline personality disorder, but there's a dedication there that I don't expect everyone to have. So when someone says Henry Cavill can be the only Superman ever, my first question is, and it's not a snotty one, so is that all you've ever seen? And if the answer is yes, okay, I get where you're coming from now.
Right.
Not, you don't get to have an opinion because you haven't read 50 years of the comics and watched all these movies and stuff. No, that's your approach. And I'm kind of curious if this show turned anybody into Superman fans. Like, if some kid or teenager tuned into this week after week and that brought them to the comics. And if you went to the comics right at the end of this series, you're dovetailing right into the death. So you're in good hands there. But even with Lex Luthor, I mean, the two other episodes that you had on the list, you had Darla Goes Ballistic, which is actually, I think, the sweetest Lex Luthor thing, because it's all about Darla.
I know. She's really feeling neglected by Lex as he's working on this experiment. It's her birthday, and he's just totally ignoring her as she's demanding some attention, to be paid attention to be taken out. And she goes so far as to say, like, if you don't turn around and look at me and talk to me, I'm going to kill myself.
Yep.
And she grabs the vial that he's been conducting his experiment in, and she drinks it. And it was meant to give Lex these enhanced mental powers, but she inadvertently made him drop this whole vial into it that was beyond the dosage he was planning. And she ends up getting these massive psychokinetic powers that grow and grow to the point, I mean, this escalates really quickly, where the Earth is going to fall off its axis unless she takes the antidote.
I expected Ron Burgundy to put that Ron Burgundy clip in there. Wow, that escalated quickly.
Yep.
I mean, that escalated quickly. And then they have the cute little button on the end where she winks at the computer screen and it turns off. So it's like, did she have all of her powers taken away, or is she now just not a danger? But Lex in that episode, my favorite part is he looks at Clark, he goes, "You got to hit me." And Clark's like, "I don't want to hit you." And yeah, he really wants to hit him. And he's just like, "You got to make this look right." And the look on his face when Clark hauls off and just knocks him across the room.
That is my favorite aspect of this, is like exactly what you just described. And beyond that, Clark's initial attempt is this half-hearted like smack. It's so feeble. Yeah. But this is an instance where I keep talking about how I feel like Gerard really calibrated, because the season 2 Clark, I don't know that I would have cared to see this scene play out, but the season 3 Clark, or 4 at this point, I love the way it played, because if you get that initial half-hearted slap and then Lex like, "Come on, you got to do it." He's like, "Well, okay." And he just decks him. But the cherry on top of this is that, because the whole idea is Clark needs to hit Lex so that it's believable that Clark was able to get away, because Lex is agreeing to help Clark and Lana who have been taken. And so there's this whole plan for Lex to meet Superboy at the lab at the bureau. And the cherry on top to all of this is when Superboy sees Lex at the bureau. The world is about to fall off its axis, and Superboy takes the time to say, "Hey, that's quite a shiner you got there. Who gave it to you?" It's amazing to me.
It's the thing that everybody, I don't think the show gets enough credit for, is how nuanced Gerard Christopher made both Clark. And one of the joys of watching these episodes was watching later season Clark, like when he's just done with whatever is going on. He got eye roll or whatever. He's just, it's just these little ways that you get that this Clark isn't, he's playing a role, but there are times where even his patience is tested, which I just absolutely loved.
Yeah.
And I actually thought the ending, I couldn't believe I was feeling this again. I was like, "Oh, this is kind of sweet." I mean, he's really, I mean, he doesn't love her because she's just a pawn in his game, and he would probably leave her to die if it meant that he could escape. But for that one moment, he had to care about her. And I forget the name of the woman who plays her. It's just gone from my head right now for some reason. But her performance in that episode was very strong, because she goes from being kind of ditzy to having to be like really smart. And it reminded me of what's her name from Superman 3, Robert Vaughn's girlfriend, where she's all like, his psychic nutritionist, but she's really the smartest person in the room.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's very true. No, that was a great one. It was nice to see Darla, this long-suffering side character, get the spotlight and be the driver. And the fact that then that forces Lex and Lana and Clark to have to work together. And that's the thing, like, as out there as this Lex can be at times, it's like, even he in these moments is like, whoa, like we got to do something. So it's great. And yeah, the other one on our list here was Bodyswap. Now, interestingly, and I know people like to point this out, Mind Games, where Lex and Clark are trapped in a kryptonite-filled mine, and Bodyswap, where Lex and Clark switch bodies, are both concepts that would then play out on Smallville years later. Mm-hmm. So the mine episode was Nemesis in season 6, where Lex and Clark are trapped. One of my favorite episodes. I love it. And then the Bodyswap version on Smallville was Transference in season 4, where Clark and Lionel switch bodies. Mm-hmm. Another standout episode. It's not a contest. Obviously I gravitate more towards the Smallville versions of these episodes, but the Superboy ones are fantastic as well, and standout episodes, and certainly why we're talking about them.
It was interesting to see Sherman Howard playing Gerard Christopher.
Yes.
Because he got his speech pattern, his and just the way he carried himself. And Gerard Christopher, conversely, was having a bulge being Sherman Howard.
When he pretends, when he does the bit about, "I'm going to get electrocuted," and he kind of mimics, that was great.
But no, I think that's a standout for people. Episodes like that are things you can do again and again and again, because they're just concepts that are rife for exploration for whatever version you're doing of the character. And when you're dealing with episodic television, this series had, 100 episodes on the dot, 100 episodes, so it could get its syndication package, and then was never syndicated.
Yep.
Because of course it wasn't. And then Smallville, you had like what, 240 something?
Not quite total? That, 220 something.
220, okay.
Maybe it just felt like 240.
Yeah, but still, it's 200 episodes. When you're, because I've heard people like, well, they, Simpsons did it, and it's just like, no, there's only so many stories you could tell with these characters.
Yes.
So you're gonna have those repeats, and it's just like, when you look at the history of Superman on television, it was fascinating listening to the interviews and realizing that this was the first iteration of Superman on television, live action, since George Reeves.
Yeah.
And since this show, we've had Smallville, which ran for a decade, and we've had Superman and Lois, which deserves to run for a decade, but isn't. It's like you were saying on social media. It's 4 seasons, man. 4 seasons and you're out.
Yeah, Lois and Clark as well. 4 seasons. Yep. I know.
Lois and Clark, Superboy. Technically, Adventures of Superman, if you go by episode count, not
season count.
Not season count. But I think with Lex in the show, you have a version of the character that is distinctive, and I think that is where television beats the movies, is because whether it's Sherman Howard and Scott Wells, but mostly Sherman Howard, whether it's John Shea or whether it's Michael Rosenbaum, and the proof is going to be in the pudding of the long. The 2 episodes he was in at the end of the 3rd season of Superman and Lois. This is a strong Lex. I think what it gives you is time that the movies don't have the luxury of. Because I remember when Man of Steel was coming out, everyone's like, where's Jimmy? Where's Jimmy? I'm like, guys, do we really need Jimmy? I mean, look, honestly, look in your soul. Jimmy Olsen in the Chris Reeve films, I'm glad he was there. I think Superman 3 was his standout movie because he got to go with Clark and the chemical fire. But if you removed Jimmy from Superman the movie, that movie doesn't get affected very much. But if you remove Jimmy from Adventures of Superman or from Lois and Clark, there's a big gaping hole in those shows. And I think Lex is the same way. You remove Lex from this series is lesser for it.
Agreed.
In all honesty.
Agreed. I'll also say, I know this is not the main point, but you can keep Jimmy. I love Jimmy, but I'm still on my Justice for Pete Ross kick, and I feel like if we're gonna bring in a friend for him, bring Pete back. Speaking of which, where the hell was Pete on this show? Totally. It's funny because I posted on social media, there was a photo of from season 2 of Superboy and Andy McAllister and Lana, and someone was like, who's that playing Pete? I'm like, no, not Pete. Would have made sense, but not Pete.
It's funny because the one time in season 1 where he goes back to Smallville and has his little A-Team adventure, we don't get Pete, but we get Ellen, who's a completely new character. Clark's a jerk in that episode, by the way.
Yeah.
Because he full-on makes out with her and then friend zones her at the end.
I know. I talked about that a couple of weeks ago, which I know you haven't heard yet based on when we're recording these, but I'm like, what is this? Like this girl, like they full on making out when he gets off the bus. She's never mentioned beforehand or referenced after. And he's on the phone with Lana at the end, right in front of this girl. It's like, oh, she's just a friend. It's like, what is this?
And if you're a Muppets fan, that is Jenny from Muppets Take Manhattan. She's the waitress at the diner.
So. I will say the Superboy, that comic book tie-in that I was referencing, you do see Pete Ross in the first issue when they have their last night in Smallville before they head off to Schuster. So at least he made an appearance there.
It's funny that you mentioned when you said Justice for Pete Ross and I shared the hashtag, because I was just like, I'm on board with this because Pete never gets his due in any iteration of the character. I mean, whether he's managing an IHOP, and can you imagine the call with corporate he had to have after? It's just like, we need you to rebuild the restaurant. Why? Well, these aliens broke it up. Have you been drinking, Pete? No, seriously, it's on the news, I promise. But, in the Silver Age, he's his childhood friend, but that whole DC Comics Resent story where his son gets taken off and he's got to deal with that. And then he gets killed in whatever happens to the Man of Tomorrow.
Off panel, no less.
And then I love Greg Rucka. I love his run on Superman, but man, the things he did to Pete in that and in that storyline, it's just like,
I know.
And what happened on Smallville? I mean, he had to leave.
I mean, that's the thing, with almost any of these characters, even if certain takes underserve them, you can kind of look to something else. Be like, well, they got their due there. I would argue Pete's one of those characters never really gotten their due. If anyone feels differently, let me know. But there's more to do with Pete. This
is a dude that straight up kept this man's secret for decades, covered for him.
I know.
Never asked for anything. Man, my friend Bob Fisher, who's a big Silver Age fan because he grew up in that era, I'm sure he is probably, if he's listening to this, he's championing and cheering on because he probably feels the same way.
Yeah, justice for Pete. The last thing, a couple of things I just wanted to say about the Bodyswap episode. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. A couple of things I really appreciated about it. I loved that it started after the body swap had already happened. So you see this family's car going off the road and Superboy saves it, but he's acting a little bit differently, a little bit more, tentative and unsure in the save than you would expect. And then he takes their car and he cackles as he's driving off. And then later we get the backstory about how this came to be. And by the way, and I wanted to mention this because I talked a couple episodes ago about how I feel like Clark searching for where he comes from could have been a more substantial arc for him over the course of the series, but you don't see a ton of instances where he's actively pursuing it. It's just kind of mentioned here and there. And I totally blanked on this episode because the way that Lex lures Superboy into the brain swap is that there's this doctor who claims he has this mind, essentially equivalent to what we would see in the comics, that mind probe device to allow Superboy to recall his earliest memories. And Superboy in Lex's body explains to Lana, I wanted to find out where I came from. So I went in to meet this doctor. So that is another instance here. I just wanted to cite that. But yeah, to then see the two of them play each other and clearly having a lot of fun. And to Sherman Howard's credit, and John Glover has talked about this many times about the Smallville episode where he had to play Clark, about how, challenging it can be to do less and to be so earnest. I mean, Glover in particular, every time this episode comes up, he talks about how he struggled and he called in Tom Welling and he was like, how do you do it? How do you just not do anything and not move and all of that and just kind of take things in? And so, yeah, it was really cool to see. And Lana breaks Lex in Clark's body out of prison during the prison transfer to the execution. Because again, I can't stress enough how much they want to fry this guy. Really.
They are bloodthirsty. I mean, he's not getting the Innocence Project isn't coming out for him, and the Supreme Court is not going to overturn his.
No, Florida is ready to put this guy down.
Yeah, and he. I think that's the problem with Houston University being in Florida. If he had been in another state, he probably wouldn't have gotten the chair. But yeah, in Florida, it's just. No, and one of the things I love about that episode too is how Lana twigs it. Yes. And it's not that Superboy and Lex's body is able to convince her. It's the fact that Superboy is so forward with her that she's like, no, this doesn't feel right.
Yeah. So I know you never put the moves on me like that. Yeah.
And I love the look on Sherman Howard's face, the look of horror. It's like, what did he do?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's almost like she's poking at him a little with that.
A little,
you would have never done that. I want you to, but you would have never done that.
Yeah. You know what I like too? Because again, anytime you get deeper insight into what these characters really want and what they're about, I'm always happy for that. And it was interesting because Lex in Superboy's body wants, and he articulates this, he wants Superboy to feel what it's like to be unwanted, to be hunted, to be persecuted the way he feels that he's been. So because it's like, well, why wouldn't Lex in Superboy's body just kill Superboy? But because he wants him to experience what he has. So I like that aspect of it as well.
The missed opportunity there and if they had more time, they could have explored this. If it was like an hour-long episode, and it's basically it was the same on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where Faith and her switched bodies, and suddenly people were treating her like a hero. What does that do to you?
Yeah.
And what would it have been like if Lex like had saved somebody and people were actually nice to him? Like, what would that have done to the character's mind? But we focused more on the other end of it because, again, I keep forgetting how short these episodes are, man. I was like blowing through them. I was just like, I was setting like all this time out to do it, and I blow through more episodes, and I'm like, man, this ain't like watching Smallville where you got 22-hour long, 45-minute episodes to watch.
I know I'm not the first person to say this. I really think if you took the best of the Superboy episodes and you made them hour-long installments and you cut out the weaker ones, this series would be off the charts.
Yeah, and it also comes from a different era in television, and that's what I had to remind myself, because I kept going, man, why didn't they, like you were saying before, I remember them talking about him finding his background, but it's not like a through line in every episode. And then I was like, well, Mike, this is 1988 to 1992. Television is still extremely episodic at this point. And because it was syndicated, there wasn't like an airing order. Like, stations could basically, except if it was like a two-parter, almost air it in any order they want. And if it's syndicated, the idea is you want somebody tuning in to watch the rerun to not have to know everything that had happened because that episode may not have aired. So it almost makes the series more impressive that they were able to have these through lines and able to have these continuing arcs with these characters. Because even though every Lex story kind of stands on its own, each one builds as he goes. And it is why where Know Thine Enemy, it's not his last appearance on the show, because he's got a team up, I think, later in season 4 with Metallo and stuff.
Yeah, and then Obituary for a Superhero.
Yeah, and Obituary for a Superhero. But I think you said it, you almost wanted it earlier. I think it came at just the perfect point, because at that point you're like, oh, I've got to see this guy. Now I fully understand why he is the way he is.
Fair. No, I think there's something to be said for that. So yeah, maybe it landed exactly where it needed to. One other just quick tidbit about Sherman Howard. This came up in Ed's Voices from Krypton book, but the Road to Hell alternate universe two-parter where you get that subservient Lex in the other dimension. They find the young Kal-El and take him in. Apparently it was Sherman Howard's decision to give that Lex a stutter initially. And I think it was Stan Berkowitz who was talking about it, who wasn't too pleased with that decision because it hadn't been communicated. he just started doing it, but you go with it.
Well, okay, now that against Stan Berkowitz, who's like if you've liked anything with DC in the last 20, 30 years, Stan Berkowitz was probably involved with it, especially animated wise. I'd almost as a writer be like, oh, wow, I didn't think of that, but that's a really good character decision, because when it shows, I think, that the actor is engaged with the role that he's playing. If all he's doing is just giving you what's on the script, I don't think they're as engaged. But if they're like, no, I need to do this, and it made it sing more. It really did.
Here's the thing. I feel like it would have been one thing if the script called for a stutter and Sherman Howard was like, well, I don't want to do that. And he didn't do it. Right. That's different. But to your point, like, this is an instance of him saying, no, like, I think this gives the character some place to go as he eventually loses the stutter, as they get more into this plot with the baby Kal-El. So yeah, no, I mean, I would tend to look on the positive side of that as well.
My final thing about that episode, though, and kind of as we wrap up, first time you had two Supermen on the screen together. Was it a Superman we'd ever seen before? No. But you had never seen two Clark Kents together like that.
That's true. No, I mean, they broke a lot of ground when you come to the multiverse aspect of all of this, for sure.
Oh, man, that Sovereign outfit is just so awesome. Like, I was disappointed that there wasn't more of a fight between the two of them, because what I wanted there, and this is what I was thinking the last time I was watching it, did you ever read JMS's Supreme Power?
Not all the way through, but I definitely read the
Okay.
beginning chunk of it. I liked it. I did like it. I always meant to go back to it.
So they managed to give Hyperion's powers to a human, but he was a complete psychopath. He murdered women, and he was just like this military guy that they eventually turn into a weapon. And when they have their second big fight, this guy owns Hyperion because here is somebody that knows how to fight, but also has this power, whereas Hyperion is just used to hitting people. I thought it would have been more interesting to see Sovereign go after it and then kind of almost coward his way out of it because he's not used to anybody being able to match him blow for blow. But we only had 22 minutes, and it was more effective to have Lana hit that button and blow them both up.
Yeah. But no, it was the fact that they even went into that territory was really fascinating and ahead of its time, as we've come to see. I got to tell you, man, this was so much fun. I had a great time, certainly rewatching the episodes, but more so having this conversation, getting to compare notes with you about Lex and just, your take on the show generally. And I'm glad that we can continue to shine a bit of a light on this. Is there anything else we didn't talk about that you wanted to?
No, I that would end up us going down like another 20-minute tangent. I will say I love this show. I didn't realize how much and how important the show was to me until this latest kind of going through the episodes. But just when I was a kid, you didn't have a whole lot of superhero television. And starting with this show and going up to 2011, every year there was something Superman on my television, whether animated or live action. And even though this ended in 92 and Lois and Clark didn't start till, September of 93, that's only a little over a year, which at the time was a long time because I was still a teenager, but now it's a blink and you're there already. And I don't expect people who are just getting into Superman to watch this show and look at it the way I do. And I understand that tastes change and people's change and the way the audience reacts to something. You watch an episode of this and you watch an episode of Superman and Lois, and it's two completely different things. But if you go in with the idea, like, don't watch all 100 episodes, but like find some best of lists and watch those, and you'll at least have a good time. Because some of these have concepts, like you said, no one was talking about the multiverse on television superheroes until Smallville again. Really.
Lois and Clark, they did. They
did a couple with Lana Lang, who I got to experience again when I went through my West Wing watch through, because she plays a character on that show. But no, again, see, I can tangent with the best of them. No, I just think that this show has a place in Superman history that it never gets its due for. And I don't expect anybody to love it as much as I do, but it's almost like that rock. It's just like, whether you love it, whether you hate it, you will respect it.
No, absolutely. And I've been saying this as well in these episodes. And just to reiterate, I'm not saying to anyone, like, go out and binge 100 episodes, but, no. And this is part of why I kind of designed these podcast episodes as quote unquote mixtapes, because if you look at the 6 Bizarro episodes we talked about last week, if you look at the list of Lex episodes that you and I talked about this week, and I'll put them in the show notes if people want episode titles, you get a great look at arguably the best Bizarro and a very strong interpretation of Lex. So hopefully these podcast episodes that we do provide somewhat of a guide for people. But yeah, I think if you really drill down on the best of this series, while also going in with an open mind and recognizing the budgetary and technological limitations of the show and just kind of the storytelling sensibilities of the day, I think you really can have a good time with this. So I agree with you totally. Now, your podcast, From Crisis to Crisis, The Married Years, where can people find that? And anything in particular you want to mention? It
is on Audible, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, your favorite podcast catcher. It's its own feed. It's a separate feed from the classic feed. That was a whole thing that I went through. That wasn't a good couple of days, but I renamed the show. And this shows you how uncommercial I am. Maybe I should have renamed it Superman and have Superman and Lois in the title 4 years ago. But when there's like a big show, and now that's coming to an end. But no, because I had to change to a new way of delivering the show, I wanted a way of demarcating it. And since we're now into the married years, because as we record this last week, I released the wedding episode. We're getting to the honeymoon. And as Jeff and I go through, we're about to get to Electric Blue, so that's going to be exciting. Coming towards the end of the year, beginning of 2025, over at It All Comes Back to Superman Series 2, I'm going to have a giant series looking at Superman in the movies, both animated and live action. Anthony is going to be part of that. I offered him one, he took another, and he zigged when I thought he was going to zag. But I think honestly, it's going to be a better conversation.
I think so too. I stand by my choice. I'm excited. Yeah. We'll have more to talk. I'm really excited.
So, but yeah, that's just leading up to the movie. And if you're a Batman fan, there's another show I do called Overlook Dark Knight, where me and my friend Andy, ostensibly the point of the show is to look at Batman stories. Everybody talks about Year One. Everyone talks about Dark Knight Returns. We just did an episode about 2 facsimile edition issues that was like the first appearance of Poison Ivy and the first appearance of Jason Todd. So it's just more of a random, but it's just really an excuse for Andy and I to get together and talk. And every Monday night, except later in the year, we take a couple weeks off around the holidays. Steve Eunice, Mark Lax, and I do Superman Homepage Live, where for an hour every Monday night at 10:30 Eastern, we talk about the latest in the world of Superman. And recently, we've been what not to wear, going over the Superman costumes of the live action versions and, breaking those down. So that's been a lot of fun. But yeah, those are all, if you search for those episode things, you'll find them on some kind of podcatcher somewhere.
Cool. Well, I hope everyone will check that out. And again, I thank you for your time and really just for all of your support. I know I've said this to you on and off mic, but you've been at this for a long time and you've been so vocally supportive of myself and my fellow newer Superman podcasters. And it means a lot, because if you had just kind of kept doing your own thing and kept to yourself, no one could begrudge you that. You've really taken the time to, kind of champion these other shows, and it's greatly appreciated. So thank you.
I've said this before, I'm a big believer in all us supporting each other, because we're all talking about the same thing, but we all have different approaches. But there's I look at podcasting, especially since most of us, some of us make some money off of it. Some people actually make a living on it. I've never figured out how to do that. If anybody's got a surefire way for me to do that isn't an MLM scheme, I'd be appreciative. But I get nothing from supporting other people other than it's what I would have wanted when I started. Because when I started, you had 3 Superman podcasts, and then it suddenly blew up for a little while, and we were all really supportive of each other because we were all just really excited that people were out there talking about Superman. And it's a different world now. Superman, I was thinking about this the other day. There was a point where if you were a Superman fan, man, you were like the leper at the family reunion. Nobody wanted anything to do with you. But now the character is finding new fans through these different iterations. And the only way people are going to learn about different iterations is for people doing podcasts. And I feel bad sometimes because I try to comment, especially on Facebook. I'm like, am I doing too much here? Am I giving too much information? Am I just just running at the mouth? But
no.
When you talk about something, I'm like, oh yeah, but, and this, that, and the other. And it's just exciting. So I've been at this a while. I'm not saying that as like I'm the old man of the group and that I know everything, because no, but I remember what it was like to be in the early days, and I want to give the support that I got from the audience. But now that there's so many of us, and you all do such a great job. That's the thing. That's the thing I'm jealous of. Like I listened to like your first episodes, and you came out of the gate swinging, and it took me like 2 years to figure things out. So that's another thing I'm kind of in awe of.
Well, in fairness, I had been podcasting for years prior, just in a different space and not specifically about Superman. So that wasn't my first podcasting, but I very much appreciate that. And no, that's a wonderful sentiment. And I hope to be in a position to be able to pay that forward when the next crop of Superman podcasters show up.
When those whippersnappers come up and all they want to talk about is the Man of Steel, Henry Cavill iteration in about 10 years. Though I joked about this, like we're starting to see some think pieces. Was Superman Returns good? Because we're like 19 years out from that now. I'm like, see, Man of Steel doesn't need that because it's had that from day one.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting what the coming years bring, especially with this new big screen version. But we'll be tracking it. It's going to
bring in a whole new crop of fans, and we can't do what happened in 2013. It's got to be a more welcoming space. And that's another reason why I try to share and repost all the shows that I see, because I want it to be that kind of non-toxic fan space because guys, end of the day, Superman is a fictional character we love, means something to us, means something to the world. But at the end of the day, Superman doesn't pay my mortgage. And he doesn't pay the electric bill. So that's kind of how I that's how I'm able to kind of parse out like if I feel like maybe I'm getting too angry about something, it's just like these are fictional characters. So
yes. Amen. Well, I thank you again, audience. I always appreciate you tuning in. Next week, I will be joined by the boys from Superboy Beyond, and we will count down our top 10 favorite episodes of the Superboy television series as our mixtape event concludes. But our ongoing Superboy coverage continues, so make sure you keep tuning in. And as always, remember, it's about what you do. It's about action. And this podcast is made possible by the support of our Patreon community. Sign up for a monthly or annual membership at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato and choose from a range of rewards. This week, I want to spotlight our President Luthor's Cabinet tier. Get every episode of the podcast at least a day early and commercial-free. Sign up today, and thank you to all patrons. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show, too. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Another Exciting Episode in the Adventures of Superman, an episode-by-episode breakdown of the classic George Reeves television show, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.